Britain was already the most important financial centre in the world, and the European Union is the biggest market for financial services. And a key reason why London and this country were so important is because it was both international and in Europe. So now that these two parts are set to divorce, then that will have a lot of consequences for how financial services will be conducted in this country and the future of the City of London. Now, this country has at least three options. It can choose to remain as close to Europe as possible, it can choose to separate from Europe as much as is possible, or it can find a middle ground. Now, the worst outcome would be if the government cannot find or decide on what it wants to do. It alternates between the alternatives, fighting for the various bits. It would be much better if the government decided we're going to pick one of these choices and stick to it and execute the policy that way. The problem really for the financial sector and the economy in this country is if this country ends up being fairly close to Europe, British companies will have no choice but to follow European Union regulations as a price of access to the European Union market. If the British government then decides to implement its own regulations on top of it, the British companies will be doubly disadvantaged. They'll be outside the Union and having to implement and follow much stricter regulations than the European competitors, because they will have to follow both British and European regulations, and that will put them at a serious disadvantage.
Brexit means Brexit.
If Britain is a member of the European Economic Area or has a similar arrangement, it will have to take on board all European regulations without having any ability to influence them. That will leave the country in almost the worst case scenario, because Britain has been a force for good in European regulations, and if it leaves, the quality of regulation making in Europe will fall, and Britain will have no choice to follow that. If Britain wants to retain access to the European financial markets, what's called the European passport for financial services, it most likely will have to pay that price. If Britain loses the passport, loses full access to European financial markets, that will mean that tens of thousands of very high-paying jobs will migrate to Europe. That means tax revenues will fall significantly, demand for services in the City of London and throughout the country will fall, and that will have a knockout effect in the entire United Kingdom and be a serious drag on economic growth. The only way Britain can keep the European passport for financial services is if it's as close to a member of the Union as possible. The price of that will be full immigration or full migration of labour. If Britain tries to restrict immigration, it will almost certainly not be able to keep the European passport. People in this country have argued that one can negotiate with the European Union, retain the European passport for financial services, and somehow restrict influx of people. I don't think that is true. First of all, the European Union finds the free movement of people to be of utmost importance, will do almost anything it can to retain it. And secondly, even more importantly, the European Union does not want Britain to retain the passport. People in this country say this is important for this country. That might be true. For Europe, it's opposite. So anything that diminishes the size of the City of London, makes jobs and services flow to Europe, is seen as a positive thing in Europe. So given the fact that Europe neither wants to restrict free movement of labour, nor wants Britain to retain the passport, tells me that it's quite unlikely that there is any room for this country to negotiate on that front. My one advice for the government of the United Kingdom is to decide as quickly as possible on its vision for the country. Some Brexiters want the United Kingdom to be as close to Europe as possible, while others see it more akin to Hong Kong and Singapore, free trading country outside of Europe. The uncertainty is causing the biggest problem. Decide as quickly as possible and implement your vision, and that will minimize the damage from Brexit.